Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Twice a year, Miles escapes to his remote lakeside cabin. No phone, no noise, just peace. But when a clipboard-wielding HOA president shows up claiming she owns his land, a quiet weekend turns into a high-stakes legal war. She picked the wrong man to mess with. I don't keep many traditions, but the twice-yearly retreat to my father's old lake cabin is something I'll never skip. Not until I can't stand or breathe. It's more than a getaway. It's a recalibration. No courtrooms, no phones, no politics. Just trees, water, wind, and quiet. The kind of quiet you can feel in your spine. I'd pulled off the winding gravel road just before sunset Friday, the tires of my old truck crunching to a stop in front of the familiar weathered wood siding, half covered in ivy and pine needles. The air smelled like damp earth, firewood, and spring. The property had been mine for 11 years, ever since my dad passed and left me this slice of solitude nestled in the woods of Burnett County, Texas. He built the cabin himself in the 60s before there was a power grid nearby and insisted it stayed disconnected. No internet, no cable, and, God bless him, no HOA. Just a legal deed that dated back to before the nearest development existed. My kind of place. I spent that first evening doing exactly what I'd planned. I split firewood with a rusty old axe, poured myself a glass of rye, and settled into the armchair by the fireplace with a beaten copy of Blood Meridian. I didn't turn my phone off. I left it in the glove box of my truck, dead by default. If anyone needed me, they'd have to wait. The wind outside rustled the leaves like a distant crowd whispering through trees. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. I smiled. The next morning, I woke early, like always. The light over the lake glinted through the window like a slow-moving mirror. I took the old fishing rod from the wall and walked barefoot down to the dock. The water was like glass, the kind of still that made you feel like you were trespassing. I cast the line out and sat there for maybe an hour without a bite. But it didn't matter. Nothing bit because nothing needed to. I was halfway through prepping a pot of cowboy coffee over the camp stove when I saw her. Across the narrow cove, up near the slope where the tree line thinned out into brush, there was a flicker of movement. A figure, female from the shape, was standing there with what looked like binoculars and a clipboard. I frowned. My nearest neighbor was a retired game warden about 3 miles east, and he never approached the lake without honking twice from the ridge road. I stood up, walked out to the edge of the dock, and squinted. She was gone. Weird, I thought. But I wasn't alarmed. Maybe just a stray hiker or some developer's assistant scoping properties for God knows what. Wouldn't be the first time someone assumed the whole lakeside was for sale. Either way, she wasn't on my land, yet. And I wasn't about to ruin my coffee chasing phantoms through the woods. By late afternoon, the shadows were long and the fire had warmed the cabin again. I grilled a couple of bratwurst and poured another glass. The radio played static. I didn't care. That night, I sat out on the porch with a blanket across my legs, watching the stars. No planes, no hum of traffic, just the soft lapping of water and an occasional owl. The world had finally shut up. That's why, when the banging on the window started just after dawn the next day, it felt like getting smacked in the face with a wet newspaper. I jumped up, instinctively reaching for the flashlight, heart thudding, still half asleep. The sun had barely risen. Outside the window stood a woman with stiff posture, arms crossed, glaring like a school principal catching kids in the act. She was maybe late 40s, tightly pulled hair, windbreaker zipped all the way up, clipboard in hand. I opened the door a crack, still blinking away sleep. "You need to leave this property immediately," she said. I stared at her. "I'm sorry. This land is under dispute. You are not authorized to be here overnight. I've already submitted a reclamation request with the board and reported the violation." I blinked again. "Who are you?" She narrowed her eyes. "Karen Dawes, president of the Silverhaven Reserve Homeowners Association. And you, sir, are squatting." It was like waking up into a sketch comedy. I stepped fully out onto the porch, barefoot, shirtless, not even annoyed yet, just confused. "This land's not part of Silverhaven. It's a mile south. This is private property. I own it." She held up a stapled packet of printed pages. "As of last quarter, this zone has been listed as unmaintained and inactive. The HOA has deemed it eligible for oversight." I almost laughed. "You can't deem yourself onto private land. That's not how law works." She crossed her arms. "We'll see what law enforcement thinks. I've already called 911. For all I know, you broke in last night. I have every right to defend community property. I stepped back inside, grabbed the folder with the deed, tax records, and boundary survey, and brought it out. Here's ownership, tax status, and county maps. You're not just wrong. You're trespassing. She glanced at the documents, then abruptly slapped them out of my hand onto the porch. Fakes can be printed anywhere. I've lived here 20 years. I know what belongs to this community. And then she reached for her phone and said into the speaker, "Yes, hello. I need officers dispatched immediately. There's a male subject, unidentified, refusing to leave a community parcel, claims he owns it. He's confrontational. I feel threatened. I stood there barefoot, arms at my sides, watching a woman accuse me of a crime on my own land." Something in me cooled, sharpened. I looked her in the eye and said calmly, "You just made a mistake." She didn't flinch. "You just made a scene." I said nothing more. I watched her pace back toward the dirt road, muttering to herself and peering at the tree line like she expected to see reinforcements. I walked inside, closed the door, and picked up the papers she'd knocked over. The front page was smudged with dew. I set them back in the folder, then started putting on real clothes. I had the sense the weekend had only just begun. The sound of tires crunching down the gravel driveway snapped the stillness less than 20 minutes later. I'd had just enough time to pull on jeans, boots, and my flannel shirt, brush the dirt off my documents, and set a fresh pot of coffee on the stove. I didn't bother going out to meet them. If someone was going to accuse me of being a squatter on my own land, they could damn well come knock on the door like civilized people. 2 vehicles rolled into view. Not one cruiser, 2. One was a standard black and white SUV with the Burnett County Sheriff's emblem on the side. The other, a dark gray pickup with tinted windows, parked just behind it. From the first vehicle, 2 officers stepped out. One was older, clearly in charge, graying temples, deliberate pace, notepad in hand. The second, younger and full of importance, climbed out like he was expecting a standoff. Karen was already marching up to them, arms flailing, voice loud enough to echo off the lake. "There he is," she said, pointing at the cabin like she'd uncovered a moonshiner's den. "He refused to vacate, threatened me with falsified documents, claimed the land was his, but there's no HOA approval on record. He's dangerous and hostile. He could be armed." I raised an eyebrow and took a sip of coffee. The older deputy nodded politely and approached. The younger one stayed back, hand close to his holster. That already told me more than I needed to know. "Morning, sir," the older one said as he stepped onto the porch. "I'm Deputy Marshall. This here is Deputy Langston. We're responding to a call about unauthorized occupancy and possible trespassing. Mind if we have a word?" "Sure," I said evenly, handing him the folder. "Name's Miles Hendricks. This is my land. Deeded, taxed, inherited, registered in full with the county. Your dispatcher should have the address on file. If you run it, it'll come back to me." He opened the folder and began flipping through it, brow furrowing in concentration. Karen tried to peer over his shoulder. "Those are forged," she snapped. "He printed those last night. He's squatting on unmonitored land that the HOA has classified as inactive." Marshall didn't respond. He just turned to the survey map and compared it to his phone's GIS overlay. After a long pause, he let out a quiet breath and looked up at me. "Mr. Hendricks, you got ID." I pulled out my driver's license and handed it over. He looked between the license and the documents, then back at the land behind me. Karen looked like she was about to burst. "Sheriff," she said, slipping into some misguided Southern charm, "we really don't need to waste taxpayer money verifying fake paperwork. I'm the HOA president. Our community has a duty to—" "Ma'am," he interrupted calmly. "Let me do my job." Deputy Langston stepped forward now, eyes narrowed behind mirrored sunglasses. "Still," he said, more to me than anyone, "until we can verify things properly with the county office, I'd recommend you vacate the property for now. Just to keep things peaceful." I slowly turned toward him. "You're recommending that I leave my own legally owned land based on a verbal accusation and zero evidence?" He shifted. "It's standard precaution. This could escalate." I held his gaze. "You're asking me to walk off my own land because a woman I've never met lied to 911? He didn't respond. Karen jumped in like she'd been waiting to pounce. "This man is combative and refuses to comply with lawful directives. I'm placing a formal HOA demand for removal under Community Ordinance 72B. Marshall turned his head slowly. "Ma'am, you don't have authority to issue anything to someone not under your HOA jurisdiction." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Langston, clearly not happy, still pushed. "I'd like to avoid arresting anyone today. Please consider temporary compliance while we sort this out." It was one of those moments where every instinct in me screamed to push back. But instincts don't win cases. Facts do. And I hadn't spent 20 years working federal overreach investigations to get myself hauled off like some backwoods squatter in front of my own fireplace. So I nodded once. Fine. I'll step off the property for now. But I'm not going far. Langston looked satisfied. Karen looked victorious. As I gathered my folder, Marshall leaned in and said, voice low, "For the record, I don't see anything wrong here. But this isn't the place to settle it. County office opens Monday. You clear things there, you come right back." I nodded. I won't be gone long. I walked down to my truck, opened the door, and paused. Karen stood near the tree line with her arms folded, smirking like she'd just won a state fair pie contest. She didn't even try to hide it. "Hope you enjoyed your little vacation," she called after me. I shut the door, turned the engine, and drove off the property, but not toward home, toward Burnett, toward the sheriff's office, because Karen had no idea who I was. But she was about to find out. The sheriff's office sat in a squat brick building just off the highway, tucked between a feed store and a gas station. I parked out front and walked in, dusty boots loud on the linoleum. The air inside smelled faintly of coffee, toner, and something chemical. Standard issue rural government scent. A woman behind the counter looked up from her paperwork, her eyes flicking briefly over my face before settling back down. I pulled out my ID and slid it across. "Miles Hendricks, I need to speak with whoever's supervising Deputy Langston's patrol this morning. It's in relation to a wrongful 911 call and a property incident up near Lake Varner." The receptionist looked up again, properly this time. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "As in, Miles Hendricks, the DOJ consultant." I nodded once. She blinked, then stood up, smoothing her blouse. "One moment, sir. I'll get Deputy Chief Salinas for you." Less than 3 minutes later, a man in a green uniform stepped into the lobby. He was in his 50s with a sharp haircut and the calm gait of someone who didn't need to announce rank to own a room. He looked at me, offered a brief nod, and gestured toward the side hallway. "Mr. Hendricks, I'm Deputy Chief Salinas. Let's talk in my office." I followed him past a wall of community announcements, missing dogs, lost keys, and reminders to vote. Once inside, he motioned for me to sit and closed the door behind us. His desk was a mess, paper stacks, file folders, a half-eaten granola bar, but his focus was razor-sharp as he sat across from me. "I heard you had an encounter with one of our patrol teams this morning." "I did. And I'd like to file a report for unlawful detainment, misrepresentation by a civilian, and a false 911 call." His brow rose. "That's quite a list." "I've got the paperwork to back it up." I opened the folder again, this time with care, spreading out the survey map, the notarized title transfer, tax receipts, and most importantly, a photo of the county's parcel map with my property highlighted. I also included a printout of the HOA's official boundary, taken straight from the county records online. My cabin sat a full mile outside their jurisdiction. Salinas reviewed the papers quietly. After a moment, he sat back. "I know who you are, Mr. Hendricks. You testified before the Federal Ethics Board last year in that municipal overreach case in Colorado, didn't you?" I gave a tight nod. "That's me. Figured as much. When she called in this morning, I had dispatch flag it as a civil dispute until we had eyes on the scene. Langston should have done the same. He asked me to leave my own property based on no proof and took a civilian's word over land documents. I didn't press the issue, but I'm pressing it now." Salinas sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You're absolutely right, too. And for the record, Langston's related to one of the HOA board members in Silver Haven. His uncle's the treasurer. That doesn't excuse it, but it may explain the overstep. I'll be pulling the body cam footage and reviewing everything. If there was bias in his conduct, we'll deal with it internally. And the 911 call. That's a separate matter. If she knowingly made a false report and claimed you were a threat, she did. Said I was confrontational and possibly armed. I wasn't. I was barefoot holding a folder." Salinas leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling a moment. "All right. I'll have our investigator open a case for false reporting and trespassing. We'll need a formal statement, obviously, and I'll be notifying the county attorney. I want her served, not just warned. She was trespassing, tampered with documents, and tried to co-opt my land into her HOA fantasy." "You'll get no argument from me," he said, standing. "We've had problems with that group before. Nothing formal, but complaints." Harassment, vague beautification code demands, things like that. No one ever pushed back hard enough. Until now. He reached out, shook my hand. You're doing the right thing. We'll treat this by the book. I left the station with a copy of the intake form, a case number, and Salinas' direct line. As I stepped outside into the morning sun, I finally let myself breathe fully for the first time all day. In my truck, I sat for a moment, engine idling, looking out at the horizon past the gas station. Trees, hills, my land. It wasn't about pride, it was about precedent. If someone like Karen could rewrite reality with enough nerve and a clipboard, what was to stop the next HOA from creeping a few yards further into someone else's life? I didn't intend to just defend my boundary. I intended to draw a new one she'd never cross again. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, the adrenaline had simmered down, but the resolve hadn't gone anywhere. The drive from Burnett back to Austin was just under 2 hours, long enough to think, too short to cool off. I wasn't just dealing with some nosy neighbor. This was deeper, a structure, a system, and it had teeth because people let it bite. As soon as I got home, I went into the office and booted up the computer. The monitor flickered to life beside shelves full of legal journals, case binders, and my father's old tax ledgers, still kept out of respect. I sat down and typed out a formal affidavit summarizing what had happened: Karen's arrival, her false claims, the 911 call, the behavior of Deputy Langston, the forced removal from my property. I backed it all up with scanned copies of my deed, tax assessments, county parcel maps, and photos taken just a few months ago showing me on the property during a previous visit. Next, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken with in months, Travis Cole, Assistant District Attorney for Burnett County. He picked up on the third ring. "Miles," he said, surprised. "Didn't expect to hear from you on a Sunday." "Sorry for the weekend call," I replied, "but I've got a situation brewing near Lake Varner. It involves false reporting, property line violations, and a potentially dirty HOA president. Think you could give it a look?" "I can't take it officially," Travis said, already shifting into his legal tone, "but I can flag it. Send me what you've got. If this lands in our lap, I'll make sure it doesn't get lost under some municipal rug." "Appreciated. I've seen this game before. I'm not planning to play it polite." "I never thought you would," he said, and ended the call. I emailed everything: case number, affidavit, attachments. Then I set up cloud backups and printed a physical binder copy. Karen wasn't going to get lost in bureaucracy, not with me watching. By the following morning, things moved fast. Around 10 a.m., I got a call from Deputy Chief Salinas. "We paid Ms. Dawes a visit this morning," he said. "Served her with a summons. She wasn't thrilled. Did she deny it?" She lawyered up before she could say anything worth noting. But the investigator gathered enough to recommend 2 charges: trespassing and filing a false police report. "We're not touching anything civil yet. That'll be up to you and your counsel." "And Langston? He's on administrative leave while we audit his body cam footage. And Mr. Hendricks, off the record, there's definitely something off about how quick he was to defer to her. We're checking into it." I thanked him and hung up. 10 minutes later, I had another notification. Karen had posted a community-wide email through the Silver Haven HOA system. A copy had been leaked to a friend of mine who lived in a nearby neighborhood and knew I was involved. The email read, "I'm saddened to report that our community's efforts to preserve the visual harmony of our lakeside environment have been met with hostility. One individual, an outsider, has escalated a small matter into a legal campaign against our neighborhood values. Please remain calm and united while we cooperate with local law enforcement." No apology, no admission, no mention that she'd lied to the police or stepped onto land she didn't control, just a smug spin to paint herself as the victim. It was a play I'd seen too many times from city officials trying to dodge federal scrutiny, appeal to community, imply persecution, never admit guilt. The difference was, I wasn't a press intern or a homeowner without recourse. I knew the pressure points, the escalation paths, and the laws well enough to weaponize them. This wasn't going away quietly. Tuesday morning started with a knock at my office door. My home office, that is. I opened it to find a courier in a Silver Haven HOA polo holding a sealed envelope. He handed it over with a tight smile, said nothing, and walked off before I could ask a single question. Inside the envelope was a 6-page letter, dense, condescending, and hilariously self-important. It wasn't addressed to Mr. Hendricks. No, it was addressed to occupant of structure on parcel -18432B. The document was signed by the HOA's legal counsel, a firm I recognized immediately, Yates and Mullen, local bulldogs for hire that usually took cases about pool fence, heights, and mailbox color violations. The contents boiled down to a threat. If I didn't cease occupancy and remove personal effects from the property within 72 hours, the HOA would consider me in violation of civic stewardship guidelines and proceed with formal action. There was no signature from the county, no court order, just HOA letterhead and a lot of bluster. I laughed out loud. That afternoon, I drove back to the cabin, not to stay, but to make a point. I parked the truck just outside the driveway and walked the last 100 feet in. The place looked untouched since I'd left, but something felt off. Then I saw it. A laminated sign had been nailed to a tree near the water's edge. It read, "Pending community claim. Access restricted per Silverhaven Preservation Review Board. Violators will be cited." It was dated, stamped, and completely meaningless, but it pissed me off. I pulled it down and stuffed it into my backpack, then walked the perimeter and found 2 more signs plus fresh boot prints near the shed. They'd been back, not just Karen, a whole team, quietly marking territory like dogs around a fire hydrant. I filed a supplemental report with Salinas that night, attaching photos and coordinates. The next morning, he called me. "They're pushing it," he said. "We just got notice that the HOA filed a complaint with the county claiming your parcel has been inactive for 12 months and therefore falls under community reclamation per their charter. That's not a real thing." "It isn't," he agreed. "But it does trigger a formal review, which the county has to acknowledge. It's red tape warfare." I knew exactly what it was. A stalling tactic. Keep me tangled up in bureaucratic nonsense while they tried to rewrite facts. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. I called Rebecca Sandoval. She wasn't just a friend. She was a federal prosecutor now stationed in Austin and one of the best I'd ever worked with during my consulting runs. She picked up, and before I finished the second sentence, she interrupted. "You're saying they falsified HOA records and used that to invoke civil authority over a parcel outside their jurisdiction?" "Yes. And there's a paper trail. There's more than that. They've tampered with documents, posted signage on private land, and used a police officer with familial bias to intimidate me." Rebecca exhaled sharply. "Okay, you want me to poke around? I want you to dig, quietly. If this is systemic, we go federal." That evening, she called back, "Miles, you're not going to like this. Hit me." The HOA charter they're using? It was revised last fall. There's a clause that does reference authority over neglected bordering parcels, but it only applies within HOA limits. Problem is, their maps were updated recently, and someone slipped your land into the HOA overlay. I froze. Someone falsified the boundary data? Looks like it. We traced the map change to a private contractor hired by Karen's office. The timestamp's clean. 2 months ago. Your name isn't on anything, just a vacant structure. That was it. This wasn't just a power trip anymore. It was fraud. And they thought I wouldn't notice until it was too late. They really had no idea who they were messing with. Thursday morning, I was sitting in the back of a quiet cafe in downtown Austin, laptop open, binder on the table, waiting. Rebecca walked in with her usual energy, shoulders squared, expression sharp. She slid into the seat across from me and dropped a flash drive onto the table between us. "That," she said, "is the beginning of the end for Karen Dolls." I raised an eyebrow. "You traced it." "Better. I traced it twice. The first time, the boundary adjustment to include your property was filed under the name of a third-party GIS contractor, generic as hell. But that contractor, Jonas Franklin, has an LLC registered in Marble Falls. Guess who signed his business license? Karen. Karen, she confirmed. And here's the kicker. The timestamp of the edit matches exactly with a board meeting that, according to HOA records, never occurred. They backdated a vote to authorize the change. But one of the listed attendees, she was in the hospital that day. She handed me a printout, copies of the fake minutes, the time-stamped GIS data, and a statement from a nurse confirming the board member was undergoing a procedure during the supposed meeting. "They didn't even bother getting their lies straight," I said. "They never do. People like Karen think paper makes things real. They think if they file it, it's law. That works on people who don't fight back." "Well," I said, "we're fighting back." Rebecca nodded. "This is more than a boundary dispute. This is attempted land fraud, misuse of HOA authority, and potentially conspiracy to file false government records. If I hand this off to the feds right now, it becomes a case. Not yet, I said. Let me do this my way first. I want a formal hearing with the county. Public. On record. Then we bring the hammer down. She hesitated. All right, but move fast. If they sense pressure, they might start covering tracks. I left the cafe and made my way straight to the Burnett County Clerk's office. I submitted a formal petition to review the altered GIS boundary under Title 12, Chapter 283 of the Texas Local Government Code. Within 24 hours, a hearing was scheduled. Tuesday morning. I wanted it public. I wanted it official. I wanted Karen sitting there when I dropped everything on the table. By Saturday, word had spread. A friend from the county office called to say the Silver Haven HOA had entered their own counterpetition claiming I was engaged in a targeted campaign of intimidation and had interfered with the community's peaceful expansion mandate. It sounded like something out of a dystopian HOA newsletter, but I wasn't worried. Then came the twist. Late Saturday night, while reviewing the flash drive Rebecca gave me, I opened one last folder, HOA Communications Archive. Inside were emails, dozens. And in one thread, Karen was communicating directly with Deputy Langston before the day of my removal. The subject line, about that cabin guy, prepare to back me up. One message read, I'm pushing a community claim this weekend. If things escalate, I'll need you to help mediate. He might pull legal rank, but if we're unified, the optics favor us. Pretend you don't know it's outside jurisdiction. I leaned back in my chair, heart beating slow and cold. She hadn't just lied. She'd orchestrated the whole thing, used a family connection in law enforcement, faked a meeting, tampered with digital property lines, and tried to erase my rights by brute force of HOA fiction. I forwarded the email chain to Salinas and Rebecca immediately with one line, let's prepare the gallows. The county building was already half full when I arrived Tuesday morning. Word had spread like brush fire. A hearing over property lines wasn't exactly front-page news, unless it involved a well-known HOA president caught trying to annex land like she was running a miniature empire. By the time I signed in and took my seat, there were at least 50 people in the room. Homeowners, a few HOA board members, 2 local journalists, and of course, Karen. She sat at the front table perfectly postured, wearing a white blazer like it was armor. Her attorney, some local firm type with too much gel and too few real cases, flipped through a binder theatrically. Karen didn't look at me, not once. The hearing officer was a seasoned county clerk named Margaret Tilson. No nonsense, no patience for theatrics. She opened the hearing with a brief statement of facts. A boundary review had been triggered by a formal challenge from me, supported by evidence suggesting HOA overreach, potentially involving altered records. I was called first. I stood calm, clear, and methodical. I walked through the property's history, acquired legally by my father, passed to me, always outside the HOA boundary. I presented the original deed, the untouched county survey, and my tax records. Then I handed Margaret the flash drive. What you'll find, I said, are internal HOA emails between Ms. Dawes and Deputy Langston sent before the day I was removed from my land. You'll also find evidence that GIS boundary maps were deliberately altered 2 months ago, under Ms. Dawes' direction, to include my cabin without any legal basis. The meeting minutes justifying that change are falsified. One listed attendee was recovering from abdominal surgery at the time. The room was dead silent. Karen's lawyer objected, muttering something about inadmissible personal emails. Tilson shut him down flat. This is an administrative hearing counselor, not a courtroom. We review all submitted material. You'll have your turn. I returned to my seat. Karen was called next. She rose slowly and walked to the front with forced grace. She began her statement with a smile that never reached her eyes. We have always acted in good faith. Our intention was not to claim someone's home, but to preserve the scenic integrity of the lakefront, which has suffered due to unmanaged parcels falling into disrepair. When a structure appears uninhabited for long stretches, the community must act to prevent degradation. Ms. Dawes, Tilson interrupted, are you claiming you had legal authority to redefine county boundaries on your own? Karen blinked. Not redefine, reinterpret. Our board believed. Did your board vote on this reinterpretation? Yes. Do you have minutes? Yes. And can you explain why one of the signers was under full anesthesia during that alleged meeting? That cracked her. The smile faltered. She glanced toward her lawyer, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. Furthermore, Tilson said, lifting a printed copy of the emails, "Can you explain why you emailed a sheriff's deputy before any complaint was filed, requesting that he pretend not to know the jurisdictional limits of your HOA?" Karen sat down, without another word. Her lawyer asked for a recess. It was denied. Tilson concluded the hearing swiftly. This body finds that parcel Yesard A432B is, and has always been, outside of the Silverhaven Reserve HOA jurisdiction. The GIS alteration is invalid and is to be corrected immediately. The claim of abandonment is baseless. Further, this hearing's evidence will be forwarded to the county attorney's office for potential criminal referral. The room exploded. Whispers, gasps, 2 phones ringing. A few residents from Silverhaven stood up and walked out without a word. Karen remained seated, staring forward like she'd lost all muscle function. As I gathered my folder, Tilson leaned toward her mic once more. "Mr. Hendricks, I recommend you also submit civil filings if you wish to pursue damages. Given the evidence, I believe they'd be warranted." I nodded once, locked eyes with Karen for the first time, and walked out. Outside, a reporter with a notepad tried to catch me, but I waved her off. I had somewhere else to be. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. Now it was time for court. The courthouse in Burnett was modest, red brick, 2 stories with a flagpole out front, and the kind of echoes inside that made you feel like justice had to raise its voice just to be heard. The case was filed within 48 hours of the hearing's conclusion. My attorney, Dana Rooks, wasn't flashy, but she was surgical. Former assistant U.S. attorney, now in private practice, she specialized in property rights and civil misconduct. When she took the case, she only asked one question: "How loud do you want this to get?" Louder than the lake. Karen was being charged with criminal trespass, falsification of government records, and false reporting to law enforcement. But this wasn't just about her criminal charges. This was the civil case, and we were seeking damages. Our claim: intentional defamation, unlawful interference with private property, emotional distress, and punitive damages for malicious abuse of HOA authority. We submitted photos, audio clips, boundary maps, emails, screenshots of her community update messages, and the original video from Deputy Langston's body cam, which included her exact phrasing: "He might pull legal rank, but if we're unified, the optics favor us." The courtroom was packed. Karen entered in a navy blue pantsuit that probably cost more than my entire truck. She sat flanked by 2 lawyers, one for her, one for the HOA. Neither looked particularly enthusiastic to be there. When the judge entered, silence dropped like a hammer. Jury trial, 12 citizens, mostly local, some homeowners, some ranchers, all watching closely. Dana opened clean. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case isn't about lawn care. It's about a woman who tried to rewrite the law around her personal ambition. My client, Mr. Hendricks, had his peace, property, and legal rights violated. Not by a government, not by a neighbor in need, but by a private citizen with a clipboard, a grudge, and a fantasy of control. We called witnesses. Salinas testified about the 911 call and the emails. Rebecca took the stand to verify the GIS fraud and its timeline. A county GIS specialist confirmed the tampering and authenticated the backdated charter language. Even the HOA's former treasurer testified under subpoena, reluctantly but honestly confirming that Karen often acted on her own and that the board rarely saw what she filed until after it was submitted. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, of course. They claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she believed the property was abandoned, that her intentions were community-oriented, but intent doesn't rewrite emails. And Karen's own voice was on tape. On the 3rd day, I took the stand. I kept it brief, calm. I spoke about my father, the land, the cabin, how twice a year I unplugged from a world of courtroom drama, politics, and federal chaos just to be still. How I found that peace shattered by a woman who, in her own words, decided I didn't belong. And why, Dana asked in closing, did you pursue this so fully, even after criminal charges were filed? Because I've seen what happens when people like this aren't held accountable, I said. I've seen what it does to neighborhoods, towns, to people who don't know how to fight back. I do. So I did. On day 4, the jury returned. Liable on all counts. Damages awarded. $235,000, including $75,000 in punitive penalties. Karen froze in her seat. Her lawyers offered nothing but paperwork and silence. The judge looked exhausted. The courtroom, however, did not. Several people clapped quietly as we exited. Not loud, just enough to be heard. Outside, the air felt lighter. Dana shook my hand and said, "That'll stick." I nodded, but I wasn't done, because now the federal angle kicked in. The Texas Attorney General's office had opened a broader investigation into Silver Haven's board conduct based on the documentation Rebecca had forwarded. Karen wasn't just facing restitution, she was facing prison. 3 weeks later, I stood behind a line of orange stakes and surveyor tape, watching a crew dig post holes for the new perimeter fence. The contractor was a local named Elroy. Gray beard, sun-leathered skin, and a handshake like a bench vise. He waved to me from the gate and shouted over the hum of the auger, "We'll have the cameras up by Friday, and the motion lights. These babies could blind a raccoon in space." "Perfect," I said. "Let's make trespassing feel like a visit to a maximum security prison." The entire perimeter of the property, every inch, was getting reinforced. 10-foot steel posts, automatic gates, solar-powered floodlights. Surveillance coverage from 3 angles. Overkill? Maybe. But it wasn't about paranoia. It was about message, the kind of message HOA presidents wouldn't misunderstand. That week, I also installed the sign. Not a cheap one. Custom engraved, steel-plated, mounted on a cedar post driven 3 feet into the ground by the dock. Private property trespassers will be arrested. Consult your lawyer before you cross. It was art and therapy. Meanwhile, news of the trial had done what it always does in small counties. It spread. HOA members in nearby neighborhoods started talking. People who'd lived under Karen's thumb for years, scared to decorate their porches the wrong way, to park trucks in their own driveways, started filing their own complaints. Then the big one dropped. Silver Haven Reserve received an official notice of federal inquiry from the Texas Attorney General's office, backed by coordination with the DOJ. Not just about Karen, about the entire HOA board structure. Fraud, abuse of power, systemic misrepresentation of jurisdiction, even possible misuse of HOA funds. 3 board members resigned that same day. One of them submitted a written statement admitting he had allowed Karen to act without oversight for years because she was relentless and frightening. HOA meetings were canceled indefinitely. Their lawyer withdrew representation. The HOA's liability insurer suspended their policy pending outcome of the investigation. And Karen, she was arrested again, this time formally indicted on 4 felony counts: falsification of official records, conspiracy to defraud, unlawful misrepresentation of jurisdiction, and false police report with malicious intent. Bail was set at $150,000. She didn't post it. I didn't go to the arraignment. Didn't need to. But Selena sent me a photo, her in cuffs being led down the courthouse steps. The same steps she'd walked up in a power suit just weeks before, pretending to represent community standards. Now she was in a jumpsuit the color of moldy cantaloupe. Deputy Langston was also placed under federal review. Internal Affairs dug up 3 other incidents where he'd selectively enforced HOA complaints, always tied to Silver Haven. He was suspended indefinitely with a formal misconduct hearing pending. One of the local news stations ran a segment called HOA or Organized Harassment, featuring interviews with former Silver Haven residents who had been fined for things like wind chimes, American flags, and refusing to plant approved flora. One elderly woman shared how Karen once told her to cut her roses to HOA height or face eviction. The woman cried on camera. Karen's face was next to hers in a split screen. That clip went viral, at least by rural Texas standards. I started receiving letters, not threats, thank you letters, handwritten, from strangers. Some lived near the lake, others were from counties away. One woman wrote, "My HOA tried the same thing when my husband died. You showed us we don't have to just take it." It was humbling and also infuriating because it meant this wasn't rare. It wasn't even unusual. It was just the first time someone like me decided to push back hard enough. The lake was still that morning, glassy. No wind, no birds, not even a ripple. Just silence. The real kind. The kind you only get when no one's watching, when nothing's pushing back. I sat on the edge of the dock, boots off, toes skimming the surface. Steam rose from my coffee like a signal to absolutely no one. Behind me, the cabin stood exactly as it always had. Simple, unbothered. The new gate clicked softly in the distance as it locked behind the contractor's truck pulling away. Cameras blinked green. Lights were installed. Fences anchored. Perimeter secured. The place now looked less like a retreat and more like a private embassy. I didn't mind. The final court order had come in 2 days ago. Karen Dawes, guilty on all 4 felony counts, sentenced to 6 years in prison without parole. No more appeals. No probation. Her HOA career, over. Her name, burned into the legal history of the state as a warning. She'd crossed a line, and the law didn't just push back. It closed the gate behind her and threw away the key. Deputy Langston resigned quietly the following week, stripped of certification, barred from law enforcement for life. His name came up again in 2 pending investigations tied to similar incidents, both involving HOA complaints. Both quietly closed before reaching court. Not anymore. Silver Haven Reserve was disbanded by unanimous vote. Technically, they voted to suspend operations indefinitely, but the AG's office called it what it was: dissolution. Their finances are frozen under audit. The neighborhood will revert to standard municipal governance. For the first time in 15 years, those homeowners are free. I didn't need more, but it didn't end there. Last Thursday, I got a letter from the Texas State Bar Association. Not a complaint, an invitation. They wanted me to advise a working group on reforming HOA oversight laws statewide. Apparently, what happened up here had caused enough stir to wake up legislators. Rebecca had sent in the case file as a model of civil resistance through lawful process. I laughed when I read that. Civil resistance made it sound like I'd started a movement. Maybe I had. The sign I planted by the water still stood strong. I caught myself reading it again, not because I forgot what it said, but because I liked the weight of it. Private property. Trespassers will be arrested. Consult your lawyer before you cross. A few neighbors had asked if they could borrow the phrase. One even asked where I got it printed. I gave him the number. I stayed at the cabin for a full week this time. First time in years, I let myself just exist there. I fished, read, watched storms roll in without checking my phone, slept with the windows open even when the coyotes howled close, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake up expecting someone to be banging on the glass with a clipboard and delusions of power. As I packed up to head home, I walked the tree line one last time. No new signs, no boot prints, just pine needles, damp moss, and the feeling of a place that had been fought for and won. Before pulling out of the drive, I looked back at the cabin. Nothing had changed, but everything was different. Because the next Karen that came looking, she'd know better.